Ready, Alec?
Yeah, when you are.
Yeah, when we're rolling. Okay, thanks. Just looking around who's here. Welcome everybody to Cabinet today, and our first item will take apologies for absence. And I can't. Sorry, everyone's here, which is good to see. Declarations of to approve as a correct record the minutes of meeting held on 16th of September 2021. I'll move that. Seconded.
Seconded.
Yeah, we agreed. We are agreed. Thank you. Declaration of interest, non-declared. So we'll move on to item 4. I think, Alison, you're going to introduce it, and then Catherine's somewhere about, and Viv, Equality and Diversity Policy and Action Plan. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yeah, so this report presents the Equality Policy and Action Plan and seeks approval for their adoption. Members will recall considering the draft documents developed in consultation with the portfolio holder and policy advisor for young people and equalities, and approving them for public consultation at the Cabinet meeting back in November of last year. As detailed in the report, the first consultation process only generated a small number of responses, so it was therefore felt that perhaps didn't necessarily provide a strong collective view at that time, and the leader therefore approved a second period of consultation, which was launched in June of this year, and was supported by a refreshed communications plan and consultation document designed to emphasise the significance of the consultation and improving accessibility of the documentation. The survey was completed during COVID, so was online, with targeted letters sent to over 200 community groups and reminders to those groups as well through the process. So this did achieve an improved response rate, and the analysis of the results is detailed in Appendix 1. The responses provided some really constructive and valuable feedback, and the profile of respondents also gives us some really valuable information to inform future engagement work that we plan to do. The main findings are detailed in paragraph 1.13 of the report. So that says that 52% of the respondents agreed that the policy and action plan would have a positive impact on the lives of the people in Gedling, and 26% felt that they wouldn't have a positive impact. So when we analysed that a little bit further, of those 26%, in the main, some felt that resources would be best used in alternative service delivery, but others were generally supportive of the policy and the action plan, but raised some concerns over whether they would effect any real change or actions within the community, and requested that actions be more clearly measurable and focus on the needs of protected groups so that we can demonstrate the real change that we want to achieve. So in the main, comments related to the issues that are addressed within the the comments that we did receive were addressed within the policy and action plan already, but did indicate there might be some areas for improvement or clarification for us, and they're now proposed for inclusion within the final documents. The main amendments are included in paragraph 1.15 of the report, and the track changes in appendices 2 and 3, which are actually the documents that we're proposing for adoption today. So key changes that we made, I'll just pick out the main ones, were an action to review equalities-related actions in the Gedling plan to ensure that the outcomes can be measured successfully, a clarification in the action to develop an engagement strategy to ensure that the different needs of the protected groups are fully understood and reflected in service development, and a clarification that the planned communication strategy will adopt appropriate equalities-related standards to ensure accessibility and inclusion. So following adoption of the plans today, service plans will be reviewed to ensure that the action plan is fully embedded in the Gedling plan delivery, and hopefully we'll soon have a first meeting of the Strategic Equalities and Diversity Group. We'll arrange that to ensure that we do provide that leadership oversight and ensure that outcomes are secured. So I'll leave it there, Leader, if I may. The recommendations are set out on page 7. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks, Alison. Viv?
Yes, can I, first of all, can I really warmly thank Alison and her team for all the work and support that she's given myself as portfolio and Catherine, my policy advisor. We've worked collectively to get to the point where we are today. I mean, I'm delighted that following the second period of consultation, that we now have some really, really helpful and constructive comments from our residents, and we can now present this very important policy to the borough. The Equality and Diversity Policy will champion equality, diversity and human rights as defining values of our society. Our policy will promote equality of opportunity for all, giving every individual the chance to achieve their potential free from prejudice and discrimination. We have listened to the feedback as part of our consultation and used this valuable feedback to shape, as Alison says, the action plan. And I would like to, a big thank you to all our residents that took the time to actually complete the consultation, which has been really, really helpful. I mean, I would say the important thing here is to ensure, like in terms of some of the feedback that we've had, that this is a very active policy and action plan, that we have very clear targets that we want to achieve, that it really is something that we will review on an ongoing basis. And we all know that actually change has to happen at home first before you can then start looking out. And I'm really pleased to say that certainly in terms of our HR policies that now reflect very much our aspirations in terms of our equality and diversity. So, you know, I'm really excited that it's here now. It's everyone's responsibility. This doesn't sit with just me as portfolio. This sits for us all as a council and for all of us to embrace. So I ask everyone to adopt this policy. I'd like to just pass to Catherine, who's done an awful lot of work with me on this, to see if she's got a few words that you'd like to say, Catherine.
Thank you, Viv. Yes, I'd just like to say that it's actually been a privilege to work with Councillor McCrossan and officers on this policy and action plan. And together we've worked on framework, updated equalities language. We've scoped UK councils for best practice. We've worked on identifying gaps in the council's connections with those community groups which contain people with the protected characteristics. We've looked into training of staff and councillors for the future. And with the public's voices, which we now have, we've created this action plan and we can measure results, and this will bring about positive change for the benefits of our residents. I'd like to thank the leadership, Councillor McCrossan and our officers who've done so much work to get to this point, and I fully support the approval of this policy and action plan by Cabinet today. Thank you.
Nothing further really to say substantively on the action plan, but just to thank not only Alison and the staff who have been involved, and I think the piece of work by Natasha Radanovic in terms of pulling together the responses to the consultation is superb, and I'm not in the least surprised having seen Natasha's work previously, and I think Natasha should be commended, you know, as should anybody else who's worked alongside Alison in terms of our officers on this piece of work. But I just particularly wanted to put on record my thanks to Viv and Catherine. I think I've said this before, but both of you have brought a real sense of passion and diligence to this issue and inclusiveness throughout the process. And for me, there's a reflection in an important reflection in the consultation about the importance of metrics and smart objectives and effectively being held robustly to account by those who we serve around measurements for advancing the cause of diversity, equality, inclusivity within not only our own environment, the workforce here, but our community and the businesses, etc., who work here. But I just wanted to make this point. Yes, whilst that is important, we shouldn't lose sight of those things that are not measurable either. Changing the culture of an organisation matters just as much as the measurable, tangible objectives. And I think this today, this piece of work that sits before us today, John, that wouldn't have got here without the excellent work of Viv, of Catherine, of all the consultees who have taken part, both the residents but also some of the excellent groups who've responded, and the officers, is a massive step forward. You know, there is a long way to go yet. Clearly, there's big work to do for the strategic group that's going to come together, and quite rightly, people will be holding us to account and challenges on that. But I just wanted to make the point that, yes, metrics and measurables and KPIs and whatever you want to call them, smart objectives are really, really important. But we should not lose sight of changing culture in relation to some of these issues as well, because if you want to have the confidence to be who you want to be in a workplace and in a community that you live in, and love the person you want to love without fear or favour and without fear of persecution, culture has to change as well. And you only achieve that by finding ambassadors, finding allies, which is what we're going to have to do internally within the council and within the community, and people standing up and stepping up and having the confidence to challenge, but also be who they want to be and love who they want to love in the organisation and in the community without fear of being persecuted or discriminated against. So I just think that is worth saying, and, you know, worth commending both Viv and Catherine and all the officers, because I think this is a really, really important piece of work. And I think, you know, what Councillor McCrossan says at the outset is really important. This doesn't just attract dust on a shelf, and that we all live this, both in the Cabinet but as elected members and officers, and that we see ourselves as ambassadors, I think is really, really important. So I wholeheartedly support the report, the recommendations and the responses we've had from our residents, which I think are thoughtful and challenging, and that's how it needs to be if we're going to make progress.
Thanks, Michael. Is there anybody else? There wasn't a question for, for Chief Exec, really, is now how we're going to bring this back to, because we need to make sure that this keeps moving. It's not just, I was a little bit disturbed about the recommendation notes. I always find notes as a little bit, you know, it's not really saying anything. It needs to be a bit stronger. Approves the adoption of the equality and diversity. I can see where Viv's coming from now, saying is it going to put it on a shelf and it gets left there and it gets dusty. So could we get this back in front of us to see how we're progressing with what's laid out in there? And the second thing is, Natasha, we know, and Michael's already said how good she is on this sort of work. Shouldn't we have all the team on that's been involved with it? Alison, Viv, Catherine, you know, the team that have been involved in bringing this document together, I think it ought to be actually noted on there if we could change that. So I don't know whether that needs to be a recommendation or... But
we can do that separately.
yeah, there's a lot of people,
okay,
and
yeah,
I
we
think,
can do that.
you know, if I was doing something I was involved in, I'm very keen on this, particularly the younger people in particular, or people in the organisation, you can put that there. If you were going for another job somewhere, it's part of a CV. So I was involved in that excellent document that was put there. So I think everyone needs that. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just to answer your first question, yes, the next stage from this being approved is to set up the internal working party, which involves a number of officers and indeed members as well, which Councillor McCrossan will lead, yeah. I'm guessing, when we develop it. And as part of that work programme, we will periodically bring it back to Cabinet for an update as well.
Financial Management Code, Alison. Sorry, I wasn't switched on there.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yes, this is a referral of a report on the implementation of the Financial Management Code, which was considered by Audit Committee on the 21st of September. Just by way of background, CIPFA introduced the Financial Management Code as a framework to support good practice in local authority financial management, mainly in response to the exceptional financial circumstances being faced by the sector following austerity measures, which did reveal concerns about weaknesses in financial management and the ability to maintain service delivery, which was materialising in some councils, as no doubt you've all observed. The code does set out the financial management standards considered necessary to manage effectively over the short, medium and longer term, to ensure that financial resilience and the ability to meet unforeseen demands is met, and to ensure that unexpected shocks can be absorbed by the council. Full compliance with the code is required from the current financial year, but the code does enable a proportionate response with direction of travel and actions required being made transparent within the annual governance statement, which accompanies the Council's annual statement of accounts. And progress going forward through that will be monitored by the Audit Committee. The initial assessment of the current level of compliance with the 17 financial management standards in the code is included in Appendix 2, and this demonstrates for us a good level of compliance from our already embedded sound financial management, which of course is clear already through our current governance processes, our approach to medium-term financial planning, and is demonstrated through the external audit view of our statement of accounts and our approach to securing value for money. Actions outstanding in the main include those already recognised as tasks in either the Gedling Plan or the annual governance statement, and will be implemented during this financial year. And the key ones to pull out include the review of the Constitution, which includes our contract procedure rules and financial regulations, the implementation of a new process for officer declarations of interests, a review of the working practices in the finance team to ensure robustness as part of the delivery of efficiencies within that team, and of course the ongoing review of the Council's medium-term financial plan and sustainability, particularly in the light of COVID and the upcoming comprehensive spending review, which is currently presents for us probably the highest risk within our risk register, is our ability to achieve a sustainable financial position. The code does indicate that demonstrating compliance with the code is a collective responsibility of the leadership team, and when they say leadership team, they mean by that the executive, the cabinet, and SLT together, and therefore this is the reason for the referral of the recommendation from Audit Committee, which is actually set out on page 3 of the agenda pack. And so I'll leave it there, Leader, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Alison. Michael.
It's a sort of slightly tangential point, but I think it's important to say, and probably won't be popular with members of the public if they're listening to this, but I think it needs saying nonetheless. This report just underscores one of the burdens and pressures that falls on teams who often aren't spoken about in councils, the financial teams, people who work alongside Alison, people who effectively keep the show on the road. And I know for members of the public, they see those who collect their waste bins, they see those who go around in our wardens' vans doing important work in terms of tackling fly tipping, etc. But none of that would be able to happen without the staff who work in those areas that are essentially the engine room and the function of local authorities. And finance is part of that. There are clearly other parts of the council who are part of it. And the point I just want to make is this report, the pressures on the team in terms of meeting this new code, the hurdles that have to be jumped over, quite rightly, in terms of transparency, in terms of ensuring value for money for the taxpayer that funds local councils, absolutely right that we do that. But this comes at the same time and on the back of 18 months where the self-same team have not only had to keep the show on the road in the council with a dwindling budget over the last 11 years, and particularly here in Gedling, a rapidly dwindling budget, but also at the same time as doing all of this stuff in terms of due diligence and keeping the show on the road, have also been trying to shovel money out of the door at a rapid rate of knots to local businesses and local families to keep their heads above the water in terms of the pandemic in the last 18 months. And I know it's not popular to celebrate local authority staff, and people would say, well, he's the Deputy Leader of the Council, you'd expect him to say that. I'm not saying it because I'm Deputy Leader of the Council, I'm saying it because I've seen how hard people in Alison's team, but not just Alison's team, teams right across the council have worked over the last 18 months. And I do get really, really concerned that the more and more burdens and pressures that are added onto these teams that at some point, in the not so distant past, over 10 years ago, would have just been absorbed because the resources that we've got are starting to add stress and strain on, at the end of the day, Leader, human beings. And these are human beings who we have asked an awful lot of over the last 18 months. And it's more and more and more pressure being added. And obviously in recent history, we've seen the same team, the finance team, having to support quite significant bids in very short spaces of time into pots of money from the government, be it the Levelling Up Fund, be it the Future High Streets Fund, be it the Towns Fund, be it the Safer Streets Fund that I think the Police and Crime Commissioner has led on, but other councils have bid into, having to turn around these bids really, really quickly because the government's gone for this kind of race to the bottom bid for money, at the same time as doing all of that I've just talked about. And at the end of the day, these people have to go home to their families with the stress and strain of normal life. And so I just want to make the point as the portfolio holder for finance, that you know, Alison, your team, everybody involved, I think is doing an absolutely outstanding job, and that these things really are not easy, and they are really important, and they're taken as being really important, Alison, by you and the rest of your staff. But I think you should be commended. And as I say, it may not be a popular thing to say, but I'm going to say it because I think it needs saying. And I think, you know, God forbid communities around the country if we didn't have people like you, Alison, and if we didn't have finance people in the background doing the work. Because actually, what it would have meant in the last 18 months is 4,000 or 5,000 households in this community alone here in Gedling not getting hundreds of pounds off their council tax bill, when potentially they would have otherwise been concerned about choosing between heating, eating, you know, buying clothes for their kids. And that would not have happened. You know, yes, people like me and you, John, and the Cabinet can stand here and make the policies and make the decisions and be ambitious about trying to get the money out of the door. But you and I saw, and the rest of the Cabinet saw, that would not have happened without the work of people like Alison and the rest of the team, and indeed the wider council. So, you know, it ain't popular, and sometimes the tabloids want to have a dig at people like Alison and council staff. But I can tell you, these are real human beings who live in our community, who care about our community, and they've worked absolutely flat out. And so I just use this report to underscore that, as well as all this work, they've been doing a tremendous job over the last 18 months as well, and I think they should be commended. Thanks, Michael. Peter?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Michael said. I mean, I'm only speaking from what management tells me. She goes to the hairdresser, and they were struggling a little bit. Sandra just told them, worked it out, we'd get in touch with the council, and they were fantastic, and the hairdressing people was most pleased how quick and how efficient our department was, and they thanked Sandra, and I think they thanked the department as well, but it's on record, they've done bloody tremendous.
Thank you. And I think on, you know, again, I'm on recognition, you know, really for the Chief Executive. I think we, if you agree, that we send a letter to the people that are working for you, Alison, and with you, and those that have gone as well, you know, those that have moved on to other jobs, etc., thanking them for that work, because it has been very difficult. And one like Michael, who's been very heavily involved with, you know, dealing with the COVID money, sorting it out, it's been coming at us, and things have been dropping on the doormat, like the leaves that are falling now. Now it's autumn, and it's been one hell of a job to sort out. And you know, you're right, Michael. People clearly don't understand that. They'll see the bin people, they'll see other people emptying stuff, they'll see general services. You'll see now the Christmas lights are going up. They don't just happen. Nobody waves a magic wand, but that little team at the back there have dealt not only with, you know, people's individual circumstances, but have helped rescue many businesses as well. And I have to recognise that, you know, the money is coming, some of it's coming from government, but at the same time we have to administer it. And I see that nice one that's just been landed on us over social services now, although we don't do that in this council, that we can now charge up to 5% extra apparently for to pay towards social services. So I'm sure at County Hall there'll be people like you, Alison, trying to sort that one out. Okay, so with that, with the, you know, the recommendation is there, and where is it? It's on page 69, and that we also agreed to send a letter to them, thanking them on behalf of the Cabinet and the Council. Really, you know, I don't think there'll be anybody. There might be, you never know. When you've got 41 people together, somebody have a different opinion, but I'm sure it'll be unanimous. So I've moved that. Seconded, we agreed? We agreed, thank you. So we're now moving on to page 93, which is a review of complaints received by the Council, annual review letter, local government and social care ombudsman. Are you going to deal with that, Mike?
Yes, I am, Leader.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. This report presents an analysis of the complaints and compliments received during the year 2020-2021, and it also gives details of the annual review letter from the local government and social care ombudsman. Snappy title. Referring to the analysis in the report, we actually received 510 complaints during last year, of which 164, which is 32%, were either upheld or partially upheld at stage 1. 16 of these complaints were progressed to a stage 2 review, and that is usually undertaken by a director for that level of seniority of the review process. And again, of these of those 16, or 37%, were upheld. The numbers of stage 1 complaints are unfortunately quite high. However, if you exclude the waste from those figures, they have improved significantly from the previous year. Waste has proved a very difficult year in 2020-21 and also in the current year as well. Predominantly caused around mist bins due to blocked streets. Again, no excuses, but COVID has created a lot more people working from home or either being on furlough, and the number of cars on the streets has caused significant difficulties for our crew. We have tried alternatives. We do have a narrow vehicle. We have sent letters to local residents advising that on the collection days, please be considerate for the refuse lorry. And we have done our best and are doing our best and always striving to improve. But unfortunately, I say there were a number of complaints in 2020-21 relating to waste, and we can only do better this year and keep striving to improve on that. On a positive note, it's quite pleasing to see that we did receive 397 compliments in last year, and again, really pleasing to see that over a third of those were in the leisure area. Going back to complaints, so sometimes if complainants are still not happy after the stage 2 review by the director, these are then progressed to the local government and social care ombudsman. During last year, 2 complaints were received by the council via the ombudsman. The first was in regard to public protection, and you'll see in the report the ombudsman reviewed that and closed it straight after his or her initial inquiries. So that was a positive move, and it recognised that our processes were robust. The second was deferred into the current year because the Ombudsman basically shut the offices and stopped reviewing them because of COVID again, and that was brought here to Cabinet in August, a couple of meetings ago. So just a final point of process, Leader. We have, because of the changes in the staffing titles and things like that, we have taken the opportunity to review both the Council's complaints, compliments and comments policy and also the unreasonably persistent complainants policy. And they significantly remain unchanged. The only real changes have been of a minor basis, and they are in relation to, as I say, the names of officers and also the introduction of the new housing ombudsman. So we have to reference that now, as we are a landlord and do have social housing tenants. Although very few of them we do, if we do receive complaints from those areas, then they get referred to the housing ombudsman instead of the local government and social care ombudsman. So in the whole, the policies were relatively unchanged, and they are copied in the report with track changes and the clean copy. Leader, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Any comments? Peter?
I think it's very, very difficult under the present circumstances to make sure with our lorries get round streets. I mean, we've got streets in the borough, in Arnold and in Gedling, where if you get 2 or 3 cars parked outside 3 or 4 houses, you can't get no traffic down. And it's very, very difficult. And I don't know what the answer is, to be quite honest, because if we carry on like this, people working from home, and I think that's going to be the trend in the next couple of years, people will start to work at home more. And I don't know whether we have to get smaller lorries or wider, narrower lorries. I don't know, but that's all a cost. And it seems to me at this point in time, it's a no-win situation. If we've got 3 or 4, I mean, we all know kids, as soon as they get 16, they want a car. So if you've got mum and dad's got a car and the 2 kids have got a car, you've got 4 cars. And people don't park the cars on the drive now. They don't use garages anymore. And it's a no-win situation. So I don't know what the answer is. But we have to try and do it. But it's difficult. Difficult.
Thanks, Peter. Anybody else? I just similar thing, Mike, is if we can have a letter to the people, particularly in legal departments, because we've been pulling them here, pulling them there, asking them to do this, and then something else popped up from government, or we've been demanding things. And also is the fact that the people I call, and I don't mean this as an insult, but there's some keyboard warriors out there who just think it's good to continually bombard us with dozens and dozens of FOI requests, which take a lot to deal with, a lot of legal things to look at, and we have to do to deal with that. As Peter says about the bins, I think there's been a serious effort now to try and educate people, and people have got to clearly come to the table. You know, I know my bin's being emptied on a Wednesday, and I'll make damn sure that that bin is in, or it'll be able to be picked up. In a lot of cases, people don't even, I mean, they have busy lives, but they don't think about it. But to get it solved, because you're right, you raised it about people working from home, and there are lots of people, and there will be in the future. So we do have to, have to look into all those things. But there was one last week, and I haven't had any time off for about 18 months, but I did have a week off last week. I had one guy, and he was just banging the key all the time, all through the day and night, of different, moaning about this, moaning about that. But it was being picked up, it'd been replied to, because, the PAs are good at picking stuff up. But it just seems as if that finger can't keep off some of these keyboards. And the way people ask for things, there's no please, thank yous. It's just we're up there to be knocked. Either officers, members of all parties get a kicking on these things. It's very frustrating. Viv?
Yeah, can I just, thank you, Leader. Can I just say, I mean, it's to think about the issue around the bins. Like you say, Peter, it's not something that's going to go away. More people are going to be working at home. The way that the bins are, the way our roads are, etc. We're going to have to embrace our communication about how we communicate with our residents. And again, the role of our local councillors who know the streets where, parking's difficult. I would say let's try and encourage our local councillors to have those discussions, because there's nothing worse than bins start to overflow, foxes get inside of them, rubbish, to create problems in terms of community cohesion. So I do feel we should ask our councillors if they could also, do some communication on their wards where they know their particular problems. But just another thing, can I just say, I mean, the fact that we've got 126 compliments from Leisure is brilliant. So I would say, well done to the Leisure Department in terms of whatever they're doing, that 126 people have bothered to sort of like say how positive they feel about the service. I hope that goes back to the service in terms of, they're doing something very right. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to echo what Councillor McCrossan said about leisure services. They've worked extremely hard over this period of time, over the last 2 years, over the COVID period, and we're getting more and more customers coming back, more and more people attending the cinema and the theatre, the leisure centres, the swimming, and actually, in some ways, some of the attendances are actually back to pre-COVID levels, so they've done an absolutely tremendous job. On a separate note, I know there's quite a lot of issues with bins, but when you get a private developer, for example, I have a particular problem in my patch with a private developer who got planning permission and they now have 24 residents in an old care home. But the issue is they've not got enough bins to cope with the amount of waste that's coming out. And twice now, in less than 4 weeks, we've had issues with fly tipping at this particular place. I'm not going to mention where it is, but the particular developer in question needs to kick up the bottom, quite frankly, because they're not actually pulling their weight in terms of what the agreement was at the planning stage in terms of where bins were situated. And where they should have been put, and certainly in terms of the security, in terms of securing those bins, they're open right at the front of the street where anybody comes along. And I went past there last night, and obviously a lot of the rubbish was cleared last week from this particular building, but it's getting really bad again. And it's not domestic waste I'm talking about here. This is waste that should be going into bulky waste collections and things like that. So is there anything we can do in terms of an enforcement perspective to try and get a private developer to actually pull their weight to making sure that those bins are actually looked after properly? and that problem is resolved? Can we look at environmental enforcement and things like that, protection, you know, the environmental health, or from a planning perspective, make sure that they're actually abiding by the planning regulation that they said they were going to abide by? Thank you.
Thank you. Michael? No. Fine. Okay, so the recommendations on page 93, 3 items there. I'll move those. Second. Agreed. Thank you. Final item, which is on page 129, which is Cabinet Notes, contents of the draft forward plan, making comments where appropriate. Any comments? None received. And that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.